Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We've got civil servants from all around the world joining us, so a big hello from me. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of the publishing house Global Government Forum, which serves civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, IBM. So today our webinar is about tax collection in the age of digital. Now, over the last year, civil servants have helped people in unprecedented ways, with governments and civil servants using digital technologies to protect people's health and incomes. But there's one interaction even before the pandemic that has remained a near universal experience, that of paying and collecting taxes. Indeed, for many civil services, tax collection and tax calculation is one of, if not the highest volume transaction undertaken. This means that digitalizing and automating tax services can produce significant benefits, both for governments and for the citizen alike, reducing errors, speeding up services, and driving down costs. In Estonia, where they're very advanced in this, for example, about 95% of personal tax returns now take just 5 minutes of a citizen's time. But there isn't a single way to do this, and countries can learn a lot from each other about things like data collection, fraud prevention, process transformation, and security. And we'll be discussing all of those kinds of issues with our fantastic panel today. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce each of our panel members, and they will give us some opening remarks. But once they've spoken, there'll be a chance for you, the audience, to send in your questions and have those questions answered by the experts we have here today. So you should see on your screens a Q&A function. Please, at any time while you're listening or after the panel members have spoken, use that Q&A function to send in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can once we've heard from our fantastic panel. So without further ado, here are our panel members. First, we will hear from Anja Komzo, who is a Technical Assistance Advisor in the Revenue Administration Division of the International Monetary Fund. Prior to this position, she worked for the fund in Africa, the Caribbean, and Southeast Europe. Anja has more than 30 years of experience gathered in the private sector and the Slovenian tax authorities, leading large national reform programs focusing on the digital transformation of public services. Then we will hear from Sami Koskinen, who is Director of Stakeholder Relations at the Finnish Tax Administration in Finland. Sami has worked in international corporate taxation for over 20 years, both in private and public sectors. And he's also served as a fiscal counsellor for the permanent representation of Finland to the European Union in Brussels. Then we go all the way over to Australia to hear from Amanda Green, who is partner at our knowledge partner IBM's Business Services, with over 30 years consulting experience across tax and revenue agencies around the world. Originally from the UK and currently leading a large team working with the Australian Taxation Office, Amanda has lived and worked in many countries around the globe, including advising to the Malaysian Inland Revenue Board, and we'll hear why that is relevant at the moment. And she really does understand the practical challenges of effecting wholesale organisational transformation underpinned by technology. And last but not least, we will indeed go over to Malaysia, where we will hear from Hishamuddin Mohammed, who is Director of Corporate Services at the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia. And in his current position, Hisham oversees the entire organisational services operation, including media and public relations, tax education and advisory, and customer communication. And his previous experience of leading large regional offices means he's extremely well positioned to understand day-to-day operational challenges and leadership requirements, as well as the government's strategic ambitions. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that we have a really stellar panel with us today. So as I said, please do send in your questions and we will get to those. But now I'm going to hand straight over to Anja to give us her opening remarks. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I will try to be short for my introductory presentation. I have just a few slides and I would like to focus on digital transformation of tax administration. Next slide, please. It's very important to have clear terminology for the beginning, and this pyramid I usually use to somehow clarify key different meaning of very often used terminology: digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. So we are talking about digital transformation. However, it's so many often confuse term digital transformation and digitization and digitalization. So as majority of our guests, I believe, is coming from tax administrations, I use 3 samples just to present different stages of digital transformation, as digitization, transferring of documents, PDF files, and similar, from paper to electronic form. Digitalization is changing of processes, optimizing processing through transforming of part of business, for example, implementation of e-filing services, while the rest of the organization is indeed operating in the same model. And the last one, but the most important, is when taxpayers don't need to file return. We are talking about digital transformation. So, my introduction is about digitally transformed tax administration. Next slide, please. It's necessary to have some kind of in mind, some kind of key principles of digitally transformed tax administration. We need to talk about new business model, which is based on few pillars, like business model should be taxpayer-centric, customer-centric. If you are talking from government perspective, it should be integrated without any need to do anything twice, meaning start from beginning in the right way and use what is already available somewhere else. It should be absolutely supported to customers through different kind of channels. Services is one of key aspects of every tax administration, and multi-channel and service delivery is the way how we make close tax administration to customers. Real-time transactional processing, invoicing, fiscalization, and similar processes, which assures not just collection of data in real time, but also compliance management in the real time. And we are talking about data, data as a value. There's data as an asset of every tax administration, every financial institution, and data-driven decision-making is the way how new model will enable faster, cheaper, easier, more accurate, targeted compliance management. And of course, modern tax administration is based on risk-based compliance management to optimize resource use and of course increase revenue collected. Next slide, please. There is a lot of areas to be addressed when we are thinking about digital transformation, but it's very important to start from government perspective and to have whole of government approach. However, governments sometimes establish separate digital transformation unit, program management unit, or change management unit, whichever is named. It's very important that it's holistic. It's across all core elements of government. It includes also private sector, financial institutions, and all other data providers. Otherwise, there is no digitally transformed tax administration. Of course, it's not possible to do it without proper legal framework. We are talking about data, about IT-enabled environment, meaning one of key counterparts are becoming software vendors and different kinds of service providers, private sector service providers, which enable a digital tax administration business model. Future is to have tax administration no-touch model. I'm coming from paperless environment, from paperless country. Now for more than 10 years, it's mandatory to use electronic documents in both directions, and there is no need to visit any tax administration to have any kind of physical contact because everything is enabled. So principle of don't touch or no touch tax administration. Identity is another aspect which in this cybersecurity a risky environment is also something that should be addressed, and of course still and always should be service assured in different ways through different channels to all kinds of stakeholders, customers, taxpayers, but also government, other organizations which use services of tax administration and from which tax administration also requires some input. Next slide, please. And environment of tax administration is very complex. It's not idea to go through any of elements of this, but just to show if this pink small box in the middle, if tax administration, the rest is rest of government, rest of world. It's not possible to have digitally transformed tax administration environment without the rest of government, without the rest of interested stakeholders in both directions. For example, banks, insurances, other government bodies, international organizations, other tax administration, depending on from which region you are coming, and also private providers of information like intermediaries, like marketplaces. If you're talking about digital taxes, and also we need to consider also this aspect. At this point, I will conclude my introduction. I hope I didn't take too much time, but I'm available for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Angela. That's a perfect introduction. So I think what you've set up there really helpfully, some of those principles, as you say, the underlying principles of good digital transformation, but also of tax digitalization in particular. So making sure the customer is at the center of this, that it's all focused around customer, the importance of integrate. Customer only has to set. So using data to drive decision making as well, really important. And then I really like what you said at the end about showing how government has to work together across all of its departments with the private sector as well, with intermediaries. And there's that complexity behind the scenes that all has to come together to make this something that works for the citizen. So thank you so much. That is a perfect first presentation. And now I'm going to hand over to Sami. Sami, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to you all from Helsinki, Finland. I'm here today to quickly jog you through a very current issue ongoing in Finland, namely the RealTime Economy project set for the next 3 years. The following may be a sort of a Finnish reflection on what the previous speaker just said. If we move on to the next slide, please. The goal of the project is indeed to lay the foundations for the real-time economy where business documents are being shared in an ecosystem of businesses, government agencies, and differing service providers. In the ecosystem, the financial information is being shared in real time and in a structured, machine-readable, standardized format through standardized interfaces. As you will note, the project is technically speaking not a tax project as such, but is a project on the digitalization of the financial administration of businesses. The project is also not only about the tax administration alone, but involves, as a whole of government approach, a good bunch of other government agencies as well, the ones that are enablers for all the development and the ones that are utilizing the financial data like the tax administration. The digitalization of the financial administration aims, of course, to reduce the administrative burden for the businesses and through that to increase the profitability and competitiveness of the Finnish businesses. The advancement of real-time economy will also allow for the development of more workable and more easy-to-use services by government agencies, business software developers, accounting firms, and so on. The project does not limit itself to the borders of Finland, but is in fact the country-specific leg of a wider project called the Nordic Smart Government that seeks to advance similar developments throughout the Nordic countries with the aim to create a digitalized business area covering the whole region. Since the whole project is all about making the life of the businesses easier, we must and we will rely on the expertise of the businesses themselves throughout the project. The whole project is based on the cooperation with the businesses, accounting firms, software developers, and business NGOs, with the aim to ensure that what we're doing actually sits in the day-to-day activities of the businesses. The joint development and experimenting, workshops, and other means of cooperation are the primary working methods of the project as a whole. Thus, we will make sure that what we build up is something that is workable and something that the businesses themselves can commit into. Now, the next slide contains an illustrative picture of the ecosystem for the real-time economy. If you look at the process of making a sale, the project covers a good part of it, but not the shipment and delivery related functions, of course. The project focuses on business documents, namely procurement, invoices, and receipts, plus the general financial data. This data is conveyed to the ecosystem where the use of the data is based on the authorization by the businesses sharing the data. The sharing of the data then allows the authorized parties to the ecosystem to utilize the data for their respective, hopefully automated processes. If we move to the next slide, please. The project focuses on three main pillars of work. Firstly, we seek to advance the digital identity. The goal is to allow the businesses to be born digital. That is, the setting up and registration of a company is to be fully digitalized. The goal is to enable this for Finnish and also foreign business owners. The digital identity is sort of a key instrument for all of this. The unique identifier allows the other parties to the ecosystem to identify the business and the information shared in a reliable manner. Under the second pillar, the project seeks to develop and widen the use of the structured business documents, such as procurement messages, e-invoices, and e-receipts. The third key area is the transfer and movement of the digital financial data. We will need to define the ways of standardizing the data in various regards. The standardization of the data will allow for once-only delivery of the data for differing purposes, for different government agencies and other parties to the ecosystem. Now, the final slide illustrates that there is a whole lot to do during the next 3 years. There is, of course, no time to go through all of the boxes in detail. Instead, I would like to point out that for us, it's clear that the world is not going to be complete after the project in 2024. There will be a lot of work to be done also afterwards in terms of further developing the services and further enhancing the user volumes of structured business documents. This is also related to the later decisions being made on the mandatory use of the structured documents in Finland. In addition, the very, very large crowd of small and micro businesses in Finland will likely require particular attention in their transition to the digital world also after the project. Looking at the future, the creation of the real-time economy will allow us to develop a range of highly enhanced tax collection services. These new services developed will seek to bring the taxation as close as possible to the daily businesses and their events, and to allow the obligations related to taxation to take place in automation to the extent possible as a part of the daily routines of the businesses in a way that minimizes the need for additional administrative work, gathering of data, or reporting solely for tax purposes. And there, I think I used up all my time. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sami. Again, that builds on, I think, really, really well what Anja said at the beginning. I love the way that you set out the program that's going on in Finland, the digitalization of tax as part of that, what you call the wider economic ecosystem, so a wider kind of program of digitalization, and even that within that wider Nordic-wide kind of digitalization program as well. So creating this real space where things can flow freely without friction. And again, I think you're stressing there in the same way Anya was stressing benefits to the citizen, stressing the importance of kind of co-producing some of this with businesses so that they actually are on board from the start, so that the benefits for businesses are really clear and making it part of their day-to-day routine. So removing as much of that extra bureaucracy as possible. And then I think probably for the audience as we go forward, there'll be lots of questions, in particular maybe around the unique digital identity. I think that's something that some countries aren't yet maybe as comfortable with as others. And then the digital documents and the importance of the standardization of the data, so that can be used in real time and managed most effectively. So thank you so much. Another brilliant presentation there, Sammy. I'm now going to go all the way over to Australia to hear from Amanda.
Thank you very much, and thanks for Anja and Sammy for setting up my theme so well, because I'm very pleased to see that what I'd like to talk about is very consistent with the direction in which they're going on as well. Clearly my comments come from a point of view of someone who's an advisor and a consultant to tax administrations, so I may have some different slants and observations on that. So next slide, please. What I'm observing with the clients that I'm working with as well, in a post-COVID environment, we've obviously been used to revenue agencies are responsible for collections, and in many cases actually paying out through grants, sometimes are administered as well. But the COVID environment has really thrown into sharp relief the importance of revenue agencies as a lever of economic stimulus to business, to ensure that they can weather the strictures that the pandemic has brought upon us as well. But also an observation that there is a community expectation during this time that most people and businesses are expected to not just observe the letter, but the spirit of the law around that as well, in an environment where there's an expectation that there are many challenges on a community, and that paying your fair share of taxes in the right way is an important thing to do. And those community expectations are evolving, I think, in that post-COVID world as well. We're seeing that moving along. But in order to do that, the simplification, both from a legislative position of making it easy for people to understand their tax obligations, and then making it easy to comply with that. Digital transformation is an important lever of that. In the case of the Australian economy, we believe that tax compliance is running at about 93%. So that's a pretty positive review of that. And only 1.5% of those returns are actually lodged on paper at the moment. But what is obvious is that the volume of online interactions is increasing exponentially as well. So, for example, we've seen machine-to-machine transactions, the business-to-government ones that come through some of the channels, whereas a few years ago those might have been running at about 140,000 a year. This year we saw 2 billion of those in our peak tax time. So a huge increase in the volume of transactions that are coming through digital channels as well. But we also recognise that being compliant can be hard as well, that there's sometimes a confidence gap in doing that, and that fractured digital ecosystems can contribute to that as well. Not from a point of view of businesses, most businesses are not running their day-to-day environment with a view of tax at the center of their worlds, and yet we often expect that tax is seen as a central component for them. So being compliant can actually be hard as well. So what we're observing is a drive to say, how can we simplify law and regulations? How can we connect that fractured digital ecosystem? How can we be in a position where we're actually looking at all the data we hold and be able to provide advice out to business, and recognizing that it's hard to be a business owner particularly for small business owners, and how do we make it easy for them to comply and difficult not to? Next slide, please. So the observation that we're seeing as well is a drive to push that compliance out into the ecosystem further. And obviously there is a huge reliance on accounting software firms, payroll firms, etc., who are currently doing a lot to connect into revenue systems around the world through various APIs that revenue agencies are putting in place as well. But a greater drive to say that innovation has to be pushed further out there. And those kinds of platforms do not necessarily have revenue agencies at the center of them, but revenue agencies have to be significant players in those. So if we're going to achieve frictionless tax to go alongside frictionless business, then we need to be able to open to understand what value a revenue agency will bring in those platforms and how they can actually help that through openness to extend that forward as well. Next slide, please. So we've done quite a lot of work on what the components of successful ecosystems are and how we actually need to drive strong potential for those by actually having low barriers to entry, that we can actually see that we actually see the value exchange that comes through that, and how that then creates new opportunities and creation of value across those ecosystems to motivate participation in that, which actually then helps that scale through the whole of a business environment. Next slide, please. So our recommendation for anybody in revenue agencies looking at how they actually move forward into these kind of platform business models where they're playing in the economic models there is to really think about the stakeholders, to really push their thinking around who key ecosystem partners would be beyond perhaps some of the usual suspects, and then to think about what is the experience that they want to develop for either individuals or businesses operating in a revenue agency, to then think about what the data is that's needed there, and you know, where the trust is if you're ceding that control out into the ecosystem to actually validate what tax needs to be paid. What are the things that are important to you to make sure that you feel like you retain enough control over that to trust what is there as well. And then into the next slide. So finally, I think that we're recognizing as well that we need to really encourage ourselves to think beyond what's well known to us in starting to think about these platforms. Obviously, there are many of the digital service providers, as we term them, in this hemisphere, around the Xeros, the MYOBs, etc., who are very comfortable partners to revenue agencies and seeing how they do those interactions. But we're starting to explore how the expansion of different fintechs and disruptive business models there are really forcing us to think differently about the kinds of partners that revenue agencies might need to engage with in order to pick up those payments in the natural systems and pick up what the transactions are as a part of actually organising the work or the activities of a business through their day. So if for small businesses, obviously we've seen a huge proliferation of say, like Square. I'm sure it's true for you in the Northern Hemisphere that nearly every coffee shop has Square, and the transactions are going through there rather than thinking about the transactions actually sitting in a bookkeeping or an accounting system. Square is probably where they actually understand most of what's actually going on in their business. So I think that's just an example of where revenue agency is going to have to think about those different kinds of partners that will help shift our thinking into that out into the world as well. And I think just to emphasize, it's really helping to understand that what can you as a revenue agency do to influence that and to set the standards for that, but to recognise that it might not always be the core, the platform might not necessarily be built around a revenue agency at its centre, but the revenue agency will be a key component of that platform to drive that value through for business itself, and to be able to give them insights that they might not otherwise have understood, which many other businesses are operating in their environment. So thank you, and I'll hand back over to you, Siobhan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amanda. I mean, we always talk about digitalisation, you know, in terms of benefits that it can bring, and in particular, digitalisation of tax collection. One of the things that people talk about is increasing compliance. And so I like the fact that you focused on that very much at the beginning, but very much from the perspective of the small businesses or from the citizens. So how can you make it easier and remove those barriers? So simplifying the system, simplifying the laws and the regulations. Really, really important that you think about it from the stakeholders' point of view as well. You touched on again, so I think this is a recurring theme that we might want to pick up, the importance of data and getting insights from the data that then can be used back from government and for the citizens and the small businesses as well. And then finally, that I think that kind of call, that plea really, I think for officials, civil servants in the audience here, if you're in revenue agencies or other departments, to be open to innovation, open to working with those kind of new platforms, new partners as well, because this is all part of one system where we can all work together and help each other. So thank you so much, Amanda. Now, last but absolutely not least, we are going to go over to Malaysia to hear from Hisham. Over to you, Hisham.
Thank you, Siobhan, and panel of speakers. Assalamualaikum and greetings to everyone from Cyberjaya, Malaysia. In this presentation, I will briefly share with you the current status and latest developments of the Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia, or in short, IRB, that are relevant to the tax collection in today's digital age. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Malaysian government is weighing methods that could be used to increase the amount of tax collected through increased tax compliance. In its pre-budget statement released ahead of the announcement of Budget 2022, the Finance Ministry noted that the tax collected from taxpayers has been lower than expected so far in 2021, and it is expected to further decrease due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. IRB has always been instrumental in digital transformation, especially in transforming taxpayers' service delivery. Here, you can see myriads of our online services within the tax cycle, starting from tax registration process, tax advances, tax declaration, tax payment, right up to tax appeal procedures. Technically, digitalization allows us to shape efficiency and to speed up our operations. At the same time, it helps to improve taxpayers' experience, and it definitely is a cost-effective tool for compliance. Okay, we move to the next slide, please. Some of IRB digital channels are Hasil Chat, that is an application with a live chat function that enables a one-to-one communication between the taxpayer and the Hasil Care Line officer in real time during working hours. Customer feedback form and Hasil Knowledge Center are made available 24/7. E-appointment is another new online initiative introduced during the COVID-19 pandemic to systematically control the presence of visitors at the counter. IRB social media such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter serve as alternative platforms, especially among the young generation to obtain faster information. Indeed, the current pandemic situation is a blessing in disguise for our IT department to strengthen ICT facilities and infrastructures that eventually enable our officers to work from home in order to ensure service continuity plan is in place with minimal interruption. Next slide, please. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, This comparative analysis diagram basically summarizes the online services rendered against the number of visitors at the IRB service counters nationwide and the total tax collected from 2018 up to August 2021. Overall, the number of visitors have decreased since 2019 and subsequently reduced further in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is based on the government-mandated SOP that no physical face-to-face service counters were allowed during the movement control order, and the reopening of these counters were made on face-to-face basis, which only required minimal presence of the staff to man the counters. The yellow bar on the chart showed an upward trend since 2018. The significant increase of e-services deployed in 2020 and 2021 are in tandem with the reduction in the number of taxpayers physically present at the counters. Due to a series of movement control orders, IRB has not reduced engagement with taxpayers, but has fully utilized our online services and e-appointments, where we managed to assist taxpayers to reschedule their payments more effectively, especially those individuals and businesses who are severely affected by the pandemic. And as far as tax collection is concerned, our digital revenue management system, or in short, we call it RAMS, has been one of IRB's most essential tool to run, manage and monitor outstanding balances and settlement of tax payables. RAMS also provides insight for the management to strategically plan and develop better decision-making in managing tax collection more effectively. We also built a smart system where all reminders of outstanding tax and installment payment would be issued through email blasts to the intended taxpayers, which has greatly helped IRB to reduce those outstanding balance from becoming uncollectible debts. The red line on the chart indicates the point where IRB embarked on the digital transformation in 2018. The introduction and usage of e-services has indeed elevated tax collection in 2019. However, tax collection dropped in 2020 when the pandemic set in. Nevertheless, the IRB has doubled its digital efforts ever since. And this year, we see a significant increase in the IRB digital service delivery. And if we compare it on a month-to-month basis, our tax collection performance for August 2021 is far greater than in August 2020. So, we are confident that we can reach the desired tax collection target for 2021. Okay, next slide, please. Ultimately, the IRB does its level best to professionally address any problem the taxpayer might have regarding tax payment. For this purpose, we have Vera, a virtual icon that provides taxpayers with assistance or relevant information required. With that, thank you kindly from the IRB of Malaysia to all members of the forum. Back to you, Siobhan.
Thank you so much, Issam. It's really lovely to have Malaysia on the panel and to get that perspective from a country, I think, that's earlier in its journey, on its digital transformation journey, but to see how things that you were already undertaking, the pandemic has kind of accelerated the take-up of some of those things. So to see how you've used the last year to drive up compliance and to use other things like social media platforms to put in place, as you said there, the kind of assistance, the email shots and all of that. So confidence, it's really nice to hear how confident you are that now coming out of the pandemic, all of those things that you've put the foundations in place for are really going to reap benefits coming out. And actually the legacy is probably going to have been that you will have managed to switch a lot of people onto kind of digital usage much quicker than you would have done before. So really good to get that insight as well. So thank you so much to all our panel members for those really great presentations. We've got questions coming in already. I'm going to kick off with one, because I think you all touched on this at some point, around the kind of question of data and trust, data and trust issues. So I think what you've all kind of given us a sense of is that behind the scenes, for a lot of these new systems to work and to be totally integrated, data has to be managed, shared in different ways, collected and shared across departments in different ways. So I want to ask all of you, to what extent do you think that a lack of trust between citizens and governments might be a barrier to progress, and how can civil servants address that? And I want to add to that, there's a question that came in from Diana Batchelor. She directed this at Sami, but any of you are happy to answer this, is how are consumer interests, in particular in privacy, protected under a real-time economy programme? So would people be able to withdraw consent to having their data used, or to limit the sharing of their data? So I think that's a similar issue around trust, and to what extent citizens might feel like they're losing control over their data. Sami, I'm going to come to you first, seeing as that question was directed to you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for the question. I guess as for the general question that you posed, this is perhaps more like a question of culture prevailing in each country. As for the Finland, I would say that the trust in the government agencies is exceptionally high compared to most of the countries around the globe. So in that regard, I don't see an issue there. Perhaps a side route to this is the data security issue that has been raised already by some of the NGOs working in our cooperation with us. And when we're moving towards this ecosystem where there are participants of differing skills and protocols and abilities, the issue of data security is something that needs to be addressed in some way and in some point. As for I'm not seeing the chat box, so I cannot recall perhaps everything that the question contained. But in terms of what we're doing now in the project, it's currently covering B2B transactions. So the consumer side is something that we're considering, sort of an issue that may come up later. Whether or not it's a consumer or a business, the privacy and the ownership of the data is of course a key issue and very important one. Although I'm afraid that I have to produce a quite sort of a dull answer, since this is something that we are currently working on. The rule book that is applied to the e-receipts and whatnot is currently underway. So the definition of those rights and obligations are to come, but at the moment I cannot produce a detailed answer to this question. My apologies for that.
No, that's great. I mean, it's obviously something that you're thinking a lot about, so it shows that it's a big part of the kind of program anyway. Amanda, given that you have advised to lots of different countries, is this issue of trust something that comes up regularly, and do you find it's different depending on the country?
Oh, absolutely. I think Sami, is quite clear that the trust that people have in the data that's held about them is very varied depending on the geography that you're in. I think that there's also a generational difference in that as well, that clearly over the last decade we all share a lot more to a lot more people than might have been used to, but there's still, I think, that divide between I'm okay to share this with TikTok, but I'm not necessarily going to share it with the government. But I do think that there is a challenge that governments are seeing as well around data sovereignty, around having tax data onshore as well. So I think that is one of the challenges in pushing things out into the ecosystem, is how do they then control the data sovereignty around that as well? Because while they hold it in their own tax systems, they can control that to a larger extent. But I think that that's an area that's still a little bit amorphous on how they're going to manage that out into the future.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Hisham, given that I think a lot of people in Malaysia are probably more used to even still having face-to-face interactions with the government, is it more a practical issue that might be preventing some people from taking up the digital option, or are they also worried about privacy issues around data in Malaysia?
Okay, as far as Malaysia is concerned, we have a buy-in from the taxpayer, particularly and the people at large. So normally at the first instance, there is quite a resistance because they are not really confident that their data or their privacy will be guaranteed. But later on, when we convince them and we assure them that all their personal particulars and so on, when they do their e-filing or they file out their return and make payment and so on, their data is private and confidential. And it is secure, highly secure in terms of the data itself. So there is a buy-in from the taxpayers as well as the public. And later on, we have that buy-in from the public. Because at the first instance, when we embark on this digital initiative, we have to have a buy-in from the officers, our officers. When there is a buy-in from our officers, then we can sort of promote the digital services to the taxpayers at large. Yes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And finally, Anja, so you said in your opening presentation that Slovenia's paperless in terms of this system, but obviously you've worked with other countries around the world as well. Do you think in Slovenia, is it similar to Finland in terms of trust in the government with their data? And how do you think that differs from other countries that you've advised?
Unfortunately, not the same situation like in Scandinavian countries, where there is a different culture and much higher level of trust to public service in general. However, considering moving toward the data-based business operation, everyone is aware that there is some kind of balance between public interest, meaning collection of data, and private interest, meaning protecting of private data. So accordingly, it's very important, and day by day, every day, much more important how data is managed, how data life cycle is indeed managed through the whole government, not just if we are talking about integrated government, then such question is much more important. So if the internal policy is implemented on need-to-know basis, and if there are different kinds of mechanisms that follow the movement, transformation, or any kind of use of data, and if such policies are published or publicly available, then trust increases.
Yeah.
Even if, let's say, some kind of breaches of such policies happen, if they are published, then also trust in public service increases. So transparency in both way, meaning in positive and also in negative way, support. So I believe it's doable in digital age to have through transparency and also quality internal mechanism to protect individual and whichever individual or business privacy at sufficient level to fulfill.
Thanks. Right, we do have quite a few questions coming in, which is great. Please do sending them in. I'm going to take two together because I think they go quite well together. So one is from Simon Wright Lakin, who says, as part of the digitalization of tax collection, does the panel have a view of the payment mechanisms that should be available to citizens and businesses to make it easy to settle with government? For example, bank transfers, card payments, open banking, or working with fintech. So I think that built on what you were saying, Amanda, about being open to different partners and different platforms. So do you have a view on kind of what those mechanisms should be? And I want to link that to a question from Maceo Garcia, who said, how do you manage to include financial fees on digital payments? So the transaction fees. So I think those go nicely together. Amanda, do you, I mean, as you've mentioned this, I'm going to come to you, your thoughts on this one.
I think so if I understand the question is specifically on should there be multiple payment methods that people have for paying their taxes, and I think we're seeing most of those, I think, are available in different jurisdictions. So I don't know that there are challenges for those as well. And I think that the actual flow of money, I think, is there's no reason why multiple of those payment methods shouldn't be available in most, depending on banking systems around the world and the sophistication on those. I think that goes hand in hand with that as well. So I think that is just a byproduct of the expansion of financial services which are available to citizens or businesses anyway. The associated question around fees on digital payments, I think that that's still, I guess, I think that question is about what's the tax treatment of those, which I think is probably a legislative component or a policy decision that agencies need to look at. And I think my colleagues who are actually on the inside are probably better positioned to answer that.
Okay. Sammy, I'm going to come over to you. I don't, you class yourself as on the inside, I think, but your thoughts on kind of all the kind of platforms that should be open for you. You were talking in particular about making it easy for business to do this in their day-to-day kind of thing. So your thoughts on kind of the options available for how people pay, and any thoughts you have on the transaction fees?
Well, yeah, the as to how to pay the taxes, that side has not yet been taken on board with our current project. So the payment mechanisms stand as they are, which are the standard bank payments in Finland. But I'm sure that this is an area where we need to explore somewhere in the future. As for the digital business documents and differing payment methods, the current infrastructure setup starts from card payments, but it has already been noted that there are number of ways, means of payments that would need to be taken into account in this regard. That's of course not the payment of taxes, but the payment for the transactions themselves. As for the transaction costs, I would like to also reserve a possibility to revert to our technical experts on tax legislation, but as such, financial costs are deductible in as a business expense. That's my general understanding of things, and I would start from there.
Okay, great, thanks. Anja, do you have anything to add on either of these?
Regarding the payment, indeed, and different modalities of payment, I think it's necessary to think about future payments. Even this era is already future, when we have cashless, more and more cashless economies and cashless payments. So according to that, tax administrations, particularly advanced tax administration, collects taxes through intermediaries, which are mainly banks or other payment intermediaries. So tax administration deals just with information, while cash flow is something that is relevant for Ministry of Finance, national banks, or commercial banks. So just one added note, because we are on the 21st of September. On the 1st of September this year, the first country in the world introduced Bitcoin as a legal tender also for paying taxes. in El Salvador implemented legal coin, Bitcoin as a legal tender, and still to protect public value, revenue. Government decided indeed just to convert Bitcoins at the moment of payment to official currency, accounting currency, which is US dollars. So meaning even such a quite new method is allowed in one of jurisdictions in the world, and we can just expect others will follow.
I'm going to come on to that in a minute. We've had a question about digital currencies, so I will come on to that in a moment. But Hisham, I want to ask you a slight question that's come in, because I think linked to this idea of is there a risk, I think, as you move people onto a digital platform where maybe they've not been used to it before, that some people don't have the not just the desire, but don't have the capacity or the capability to engage in a digital system. So how can you help with that in a country like Malaysia? Is there a way that you can educate people on kind of moving to digital? Are there initiatives underway to help people to do that? What's your kind of thinking on allowing people to move over to a digital way of paying their tax?
Yes, sure, Shiva. When we move from analog to digital last time, and when we start our self-assessment system in 2003, there was a lot of resistance at the point of time. People are not used to filing their return online and so on. So what we did is that we have a special unit at every branch nationwide called the Hasil Care Group. So what we did is that we offer them simple class to how to go about in filing their tax return, especially for those who are not computer savvy. But for younger generation, they don't have any problem. They are very fast learner, and we don't have problems. But the problem here is the older generation, you see, who are very afraid of the computer. So what we did is that we offer a hands-on training to them. So if they have any problem, they can come over to our office, and we offer them classes and so on, or hands-on practical training. So that's how we overcome this problem of this place of illiterate in digital or classes.
Great, okay. Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of other questions here. I'm going to again ask two together because one builds on what Anja was saying. It's come from Mohammed Tajuddin, and it's how comfortable are tax administrators to digital currency payments? So I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to what Anja already said there, but there's a slightly different one, so you can either answer one or both, from John Barron, who said, is there any kickback from tax intermediaries as real-time connected systems can diminish their business opportunities? So two very different kind of questions there. Anja, you're nodding your head there. I'm going to come back to you on one or either of those.
You know, life is changing every time, every day, every second, and all the intermediaries should find their niche to provide a little bit adapted services to the situation. So considering the necessity to move away from any kind of visiting any intermediaries in physical presence, to have any kind of physical contact, that means they have to change their way. Considering transferring of any cash payments to cashless payments, meaning also distance payment, there is principally no need for intermediaries, but they will find their way indeed, as for example, in case of digital tax, as an intermediary to settle transactions between two parties, sellers and buyers. And in future, it's possible that they will act as a real-time collection, or even in case of, for example, Europe, for small value goods or for electronic services, imported electronic services to Europe, intermediaries indeed collect VAT. So their role will change over time, and I believe they will find their way how to continue or even grow.
Everything's evolving fast, so everybody has to keep evolving with it, don't they? Amanda, you're nodding there. Do you agree?
Oh no, 100%. I think that in the same way as, you know, nobody takes a roll of film to be developed anymore. It's, you know, some roles will evolve, and I think it's the opportunity there for intermediaries to say, well, what's the real value add that I'm going to put into this? And it's not going to be just about preparation of documents or whatever. It'll be higher value activities that they can offer. But the world changes and jobs change, and I think they will evolve the successful ones will evolve to those higher value services.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any thoughts on the digital currencies? In your experience, are governments thinking about this? Are they open to this?
There's still a lot of, I was very interested in what Anja said, but I think there's still a lot of fear around the digital currencies, and still a lot of unknowns there.
Yeah. Hisham, you talked about kind of using different platforms. Are you talking to intermediaries? Do you think they are interested as you digitalize more of your services? How are you kind of working with sectors?
With tax intermediaries, I think there is a great support from them, especially the tax agents and the taxpayers at large. They do support this transformation, the digital transformation, because it's easier for them. They think that when we go into a digital platform providing services, so especially in this pandemic era, so it will be more practical for them in order for them to make payment, filing their returns and everything. So basically, they like the services that we offer them, and the most important thing is that they can get the services 24/7 without have to going up to although it's a lockdown, but they can still perform business as usual.
Yeah. Thank you, Sammy. So your thoughts on digital currencies? Is this something that Finland is considering? And the intermediaries and how they are flexing and changing and evolving as things change.
I'm sorry, I missed a part of the first question. Are you talking about the digital currencies as means of payments for taxes, yes, or as an economic issue?
No, means of paying your tax through a digital currency.
All right. Yes. Currently, no position on that, or you cannot use those as a payment means. But as Amanda was saying, things are changing, and we need to embrace ourselves for that. And those changes can be quite quick, as we have all probably witnessed during our careers. As for the intermediaries, the roles, as Amanda was saying, will be changing quite a lot from what they used to be towards something, as was said, a more perhaps higher value producing work. The standardization that I was briefly talking about during my opening remarks, that will allow the companies to change the service providers more easily than they can do now. You're currently more or less locked into a service provider. I mean, a financial software and so on. But the standardization provides the possibility to move around between the service providers, which will create additional business opportunities, but also to increase competition as well. So that's a big change. But as Amanda was saying, the core line of work in, let's say, bookkeeping firms, that will change immensely. Thirdly, I would like to point out that the platforms as intermediaries in Europe, the DAX 7 directive changed the picture quite a lot, and set the platform operators as sources of information for taxation. It was a significant change adopted by the European Council a year ago.
Brilliant, thank you. We still got, I think, a really good final question to end on. I can't believe how fast the the time has gone on this discussion. But before we do that, I just would like to say to the audience that a questionnaire will have been sent to your inboxes. Just to say, if you do have a couple of minutes to fill in that questionnaire, it's really helpful for us to make sure that we provide the topics that you're interested in and that we get the focus right. So grateful in advance if you could do that. But let me go on to the last question. I was going to ask a question about, do you think that given the benefits that can be had from kind of digitalization of services, but tax collection in particular, whether governments are providing enough investment and whether they are seeing this as a high enough priority? And I think that fits nicely actually with this question that's come in from Olatunde Elujoba, who has asked, what do you think are the biggest pain points? So I think the things that are difficult, or challenges that governments face in the digital transformation of tax administration. So what are the hardest things? I think that's quite a nice question actually to put to all of you. Looking forward, what do you think are going to be the hardest things for governments and for civil servants as they continue down this journey of digital transformation of their tax services? Hisham, I'm going to come to you because you are obviously thinking about this very hard at the moment. What do you think are going to be the biggest challenges?
I think the biggest challenges is to have a compliant taxpayer with the system that we have, because if you see, although we have all of the systems and the services online, but if you don't have the buy-in from the taxpayer, particularly the taxpayer, then it will make us frustrated. So in line with this, we need to create awareness among the taxpayers that they have to go, the trend now is to go online, to go digital. They have to get used to it. It's true that they don't feel comfortable at the first time using it, but later on they will feel very comfortable. It's just like doing e-banking, you see, online banking and things like that. So it is going to be a culture later on. So if all the taxpayers are using our online services, then they don't have to come to the office anymore. They don't have to come to our counters anymore. And they can get the service 24/7. So it's very convenient to them. And these are the challenges that we have. If all the taxpayers are using e-services, then it will have a lot. And indirectly, our tax collection will go up. Because by using digital services, it will make most of the processes easier. Yes.
Great. So compliance is your big challenge, I think. I said this would be the final question, and it is, and I'm going to put it to the other three panel members, but I want to add in, we've just had a question come in, which, yeah, if you're not comfortable answering this, that's fine, but it's a question from Afende Ayla, I think. And it's saying she understands all the benefits, or he understands all the benefits that we talked about making things easier for people to pay their taxes for citizens and businesses. What about those really big organizations? They've mentioned Google, Amazon, who maybe perception is they don't pay the amount of tax that they should be paying. Do these new digital services, is that going to help in that respect? So in terms of compliance, will it help for big organizations like that, as well as smaller businesses and citizens? Maybe slightly political there, so you don't have to answer that if you don't want to, but Amanda, I'm going to come to you. So your biggest challenge, and you can add in that final bit if you like.
Okay, I think there are many challenges, but let me just talk about three of them. First is keeping pace with citizen expectations, because the bar is constantly rising of all the other parts of their lives where they see digital transformation. So their expectation is that government should be able to offer them that. So I think it's having a view on that horizon of what those expectations will be and being able to focus on those. But then it might seem contradictory to what I've just said, but then I think it's having a roadmap then that says what's the first achievable thing that we can do, and what's the second and what's the third. So being sort of clear that there is no place anymore for 10-year transformation projects, that people are looking for a much more agile environment in which some smaller things are delivered quicker. So I think that's a challenge to make sure that there's a roadmap to deliver that as well. But I think the third area is having the right skills and building those skills within revenue agencies, building a workforce that's resilient and adaptable to those kinds of changes, and making sure that they have the opportunity to keep pace with that. Because I would say, working with my own teams, that they get to do as exciting work as anybody who's working with the banks or the airlines or anything. And in fact, during this time, it's also been a lot more reliable source of work as well. So I think making sure that you've got the right skills to be able to drive that is really important. Just touching on that political questions, as you termed it, I think that we need to be really clear to differentiate between what's tax evasion or non-compliance in deliberate non-compliance, and what is a structuring of a corporate's affairs to optimize their tax as well. And so I think you've got to draw that distinction first of all. But I do think that what digitization actually gives revenue agencies is perhaps a better insight into how corporates might be structuring their affairs. And I think there's already a lot of multinational anti-avoidance laws that help manage some of that for tax agencies as well.
Again, it comes back to using that data to get those insights for the wider economic and financial performance that's happening. Thank you. Sammy, your thoughts on the biggest challenges?
Well, I was smiling or laughing when Amanda was speaking, because I think that our minds are working together here. The first point that I would perhaps raise is the sustainability of the systems that we are creating. The ever-changing environment and technologies and business models and whatnot will provide additional challenges to the digitalized tax systems that we are creating. One of the aspects in there relates to the second point, which is the buy-in question from the audience, and that is the expectation of the service levels. That's quite neatly discussed in the OECD Tax Administration 3.0 report, where it says that the services in general in public, they are so easy to use and so user-friendly that the tax administration needs to keep up with those in order to maintain the ability to preserve the compliance levels, because peoples and businesses get frustrated if the systems are too difficult to use compared to what they face in other areas. But the managing of the buy-in, there are different issues with respect to large companies, mid-sized companies, and small companies, and the micro businesses are, as I said, something of a very focal area for us, as the digitalization process in there is probably the most challenging. The new skill sets, that's an immensely important stuff, but Amanda already talked about those. Yeah. Then the question on the large businesses, I'm sort of counting on that the digitalization increases the transparency of issues and allows us to enhance our data analysis that will help us to see more into what's going on in the large businesses and to work proactively on issues that are on the table. Lastly, I would point out that I think that the transparency in general is a growing trend. There are projects and solutions available around the planet where the companies themselves are committing to transparency on their tax policies and tax payments, and over the time I would predict that this is something of a growing phenomenon in Finland and globally. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Andrew, we started with you. I'm going to finish with you for your thoughts on the big challenges. We've got a minute left.
The biggest challenge is indeed the readiness of the environment, readiness of the country from all aspects: legal, technology, infrastructure, data, knowledge, skills, and particularly planning and reform management capacity. So it's important for country to have, from revenue perspective, so-called, we call it midterm revenue strategy, which is strategy which has all aspects covered, including change management from where we are now and where we want to be, with all changes which tackle people, processes, technology, and of course customers, taxpayers, and the other community. So strategy is the answer, but there are a lot of preconditions to have it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Before I say a final thank you to our fantastic panel who've been so wonderful today, I just want to mention to the audience, if you enjoyed what you heard today and you want to do more of this, then Global Government Forum are actually running a training seminar on the subject of understanding leadership in a digitally enabled and data-driven world. And you will get information about that sent to you on email if you've registered for this event. And places are limited. So if you are interested in that, please do look out for your emails, because it could be very useful for you, especially if you're in a management position. I want to say a huge thank you to all our audience for sending in the questions, but to our fantastic panel. So to Anja, to Sami, to Amanda, and to Hishamuddin, thank you so much. It's been fantastic to have that global perspective today, to see those different perspectives. We will actually be sending around a recording of this webinar so you can share it with colleagues. You can watch it all over again if you missed bits of it or just want to play back different bits. And there will also be an article written with the key points that will be sent around to people as well. So you can share that with your colleagues as well. And a final thanks to IBM, our knowledge partner today. Great to have Amanda there sharing her expertise as well. To everybody, wherever you are, especially if you stayed up late for this webinar or got up early, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again very soon for another Global Government Forum webinar. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Siobhan.